So welcome to everyone who's joining this live. This is a recording of a live online session. And welcome to everyone who's listening in to a recording of this. So two things are kind of going to be happening during this session. I'm going to be sharing some ideas. And the invitation is to really take the ideas to heart. To not just think about them, but to really, how do we feel about them? Do they feel true to us? And maybe if we have other ideas that contradict some of them, maybe just put the other ideas aside for a moment. I'm not asking you to let go of anything you believe, but maybe try on something new and see how it feels. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, during this entire session, and even while you're listening to this recording, you can do something called tuning in. The German word is einstellen. It has many meanings: to attune, to focus on, to take in. But what are we going to focus on? What are we going to take in? What are we going to tune into? Well, divine life healing energy. That there is an energy available that can help in every aspect of our life, and can actually can heal us also on every level. The way to do this is to observe your body, being open to this energy. It's really as simple as that. So throughout the entire session, even while talking is going on, and even while people are listening to this recording, I invite you to observe your body and notice how you feel. So, Bruno Groening said, "Give me your illnesses. Give me your worries. You cannot cope with them. I will carry them for you. My back is broad. I want to take them from you. I know that it is a burden. That is everything. How many thousands are already grateful for this? It hasn't weakened me. On the contrary, I keep getting stronger." So for anyone who hasn't heard much about Bruno Groening, or that might seem a little strange, give some person our illness? That doesn't really, on the surface, that doesn't make much sense. And yet, when people would inwardly say, "Okay, Bruno, take this arthritis, take my cancer, take my illness," not always, but sometimes the illness would literally vanish. And I've had that very experience myself. I've given an illness to Bruno Groening mentally. Obviously, he's not here physically present with me, and the illness has vanished. So let's do that now. Let's offer over. And if it doesn't feel comfortable to offer it to Bruno Groening, you can offer it to God, to healing energy, or if there's another spiritual helper you're connected to Christ or another helper, you can literally offer over illnesses, burdens, fears, negative thoughts. Let's do that now. To whomever or whatever it feels most comfortable. Offering over our worries, our burdens, our illnesses. Now, he said, "Give me your illnesses. Give me your worries. You can't cope with them." Why would he say that? You can't cope with your illness or your burden. On the surface, that sounds very disempowering. However, that's what this meeting is going to be about. The idea that as much as we don't like to admit it, we need help solving all of our problems. Bruno Groening pointed out the fact that over and over again, Human beings need God. They need the divine. As much as we like to think we don't, we actually need a higher power to help us. And that's what this gathering is going to be about today, exploring this idea of the need for help on the spiritual path. So let's spend a few minutes in silence, absorbing this positive energy, observing our body, welcoming the peaceful quiet, as Bruno Groening said. Observing the body, taking in the good, letting go of thoughts, offering negative thoughts over to Bruno or to God or another helper. So again, even as the meeting continues, you can continue to observe your body and take in this energy. So, Bruno Groening said, we must not forget that we are children of God, alone. Only He can help us. That's a very interesting statement. Only He, meaning God. Only God can help us. I didn't used to think that. I used to thought I could help myself, other people could help me, and certainly I can help myself and other people can help me. However, what does Bruno Groening mean when he says, only God can help us? Well, my understanding is that Bruno Groening is talking about, in a sense, the ultimate solution, which is freedom from evil. And then when it comes to freeing ourselves from evil, which shows up as negative thinking, negative energy, and what Bruno called the force of habit, that in the end we need divine help for that, that human beings can point us in that direction, that certainly we can take positive actions, and that we have to take positive actions, but we need God for that process. Freeing ourselves from evil, it's like the most delicate, intricate surgery, spiritual surgery imaginable. It's not something we can do on our own, according to Bruno Groening, anyway. So this really became clear to me in my own journey with addictions. What Bruno Groening meant. Only God can help us. and that we need God. So a very brief, when I first found the Teachings of Bruno Groening, my body was a mess. It was literally falling apart, and one by one, all the different things healed. It was amazing. And then through a variety of circumstances, I did what Bruno Groening advised us not to do. I listened to other people. I met someone and got involved in a romantic relationship, and her belief was that the ultimate path is through a spiritual relationship. And in a sense that, she didn't quite say it like that, but that we don't, in a sense, need God, that all you need to find is the right partner. And I won't go too much into it, but what I will say is it got me off this path. I listened to her, and instead of following my heart, instead of following God, and fell off this path. And in falling off this path, I started back into addictive behaviors. Two of those addictions, Bruno Groening himself, or this work, had healed me of: a very severe internet addiction and a very severe video game addiction. So I fell off of this path, and addictive behaviors got very strong again into me, where they were actually wrecking my life and my health, and in a sense destroying my life. And other addictions came back as well. And so I began to explore something called the 12 Steps, which was created in the, I think, 1940s. Originally, there was a group called the Oxford Group, which had helped people find freedom from addictions through following the teachings of Christ. And one of the people who was a member of the Oxford Group started this thing called the 12 Steps. And basically, the 12 Steps are a path of surrendering to God and admitting that and originally it was for alcoholics, that an alcoholic who gets to a certain point can't cure themselves. The only cure for them is for God to relieve them of the burden. And it was in exploring this path that I really came to understand Bruno Groening's teachings, or this part of his teaching. So basically, the people who really show up for to do the 12 steps are people they're at the end of their rope. These are the kind of people who, once they start drinking or using drugs, or in my case, it was overeating and compulsive internet use, they go out of control. They literally go crazy with their behavior. It can get to that point. And for such people, then they become willing to surrender. Because before that, and sometimes it takes things getting really bad to create the willingness to surrender. So it was going to these meetings, and even though I wasn't an alcoholic and I wasn't a drug addict, I would go and listen because I felt like these people could teach me. I went to all different kinds of meetings, for food addicts, for alcoholics, for addicts. And what I heard was that a couple of things. That these were people who were destroying themselves and they couldn't stop. They literally could not stop. They knew it. They were, on some level, they knew that it was destroying them. And they tried everything. Discipline, for the alcoholics, getting rid of the alcohol, making promises, going to church, going on a retreat. And the same thing with the food addicts. They had gotten rid of all the negative foods from their house, had just tried everything and nothing worked. Not only had nothing worked, but they were at the end of their rope, meaning if they kept on the path they were on, it was going to literally kill them and destroy them. And they were obviously miserable, and yet they couldn't stop. So the first step, these 12 steps of the 12 steps, are just a spiritual process of surrendering to God. And the first step is, let's say for an alcoholic, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. It's a very humbling process to be destroying yourself. And in my case, again, it was food and the computer. And most people don't think of that addiction as particularly bad, but when I would do it all day long, day after day, and I literally could not stop. And that's how it is for an addict who gets to a certain point. So, that's the first step, admitting. I had to, and I heard these other people admit that they were powerless over alcohol or food or drugs or other addictions, that their lives had become unmanageable. What that means is, I can't stop this. I can stop it for an hour or a day, but I and other addicts can't stop and stay stopped. So the first piece is coming to this real humility. And then the second step is, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Okay, so the first step is basically admitting that of myself and of human aid, I'm doomed. There's actually no solution, no human solution. Because as long as you believe in a human solution, then you'll keep attempting things. You'll keep trying things. But once you run out of options, once you realize, oh my God, nothing has worked and probably nothing will work, then you become open to a different solution, a divine solution. And that's the second step, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then the third step is, made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him. So what I heard in these meetings were that these were people who they had a problem that was killing them and there was no human or earthly solution, and that they turned to God. And that when they turned to God, and when they surrendered to God, and when they lived by spiritual principles, the addiction vanished. Literally vanished. Many times even the desire, which was with some addicts, the desire, once it gets bad enough, the desire is with you all the time. And it would literally go away, and it would stay away as long as they lived in harmony with spiritual principles, which are the remaining 9 steps. And here's a quote from Bruno Groening. Don't overlook or forget, friends, that man lives between good and evil. He lives right in between. Here good, here evil. Man is in between, he decides. If he is too weak, he falls for evil. He falls down. He can't follow the path that leads upwards. There won't be enough strength. He will fall down into evil's arms and is then delivered to evil. If a saving hand doesn't come along and pull him out, he'll be lost for quite some time. He will then have to serve evil. So some people get to a certain point where they cannot free themselves, and they need divine help. In terms of illness, once we get to the point where we actually have an illness, we've taken on quite a bit of evil. And according to Bruno Groening, we can't free ourselves. We need help. Now, obviously, we can go to the doctor and be given a pill that will end the symptom, but will it really cure us? And will it really cure what caused the evil? So, let's spend a little time in silence and contemplate both what Bruno Groening says about evil, and if it feels right, think about these first 3 steps. This idea that there are things in life that are bigger than us. There are problems and burdens. Bruno Groening would say evil itself is stronger than us until we become spiritually fit again. And then do we believe that there is a power greater than evil? Is there something bigger than our problems? Is there a power or a force? That's the second step, came to believe. And the third step, turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Well, if we have a problem that's bigger than us, and we believe that there is something bigger than the problem, are we willing to really turn to that power, that force that's greater than the problem? So let's spend a little time in silence, continuing to observe the body, noticing how we feel, and seeing how this resonates. Some people don't think they need help. What's important is not so much what I say, but what feels true to you. Observing the body, noticing how we feel, taking in divine energy. Opening to the good, wanting the good. So when I went to these meetings and listened to these stories, I was a little confused. I was like, how can these people have miraculous healings? They're not tuning in. They're not taking in positive energy. Because at that point, I was really thinking that it was all about tuning in. But what these people were doing, that I really wasn't doing, was they were actually practicing Bruno's teachings. Over and over, Bruno says, in so many different ways, we need God. And they were surrendering to God. They were offering themselves in service to God. And the 12 steps were just completely, the people who wrote them, completely based on the teachings of Christ. So they were basically following Christ's teachings, following Bruno's teachings. They just didn't know about tuning in. But then maybe they did. Because Bruno once said, when you think good thoughts and do good deeds, the good naturally enters. And these were people thinking good thoughts. And part of the 12 steps, it's all about service, becoming an instrument of God's peace. And some of these people who were literally on the brink of death, or on the brink of being locked up for insanity, or locked up in jail, the people who practiced this path, they were some of the happiest people I'd ever met. They really accomplished the great turnaround in themselves because they really surrendered to God. They gave up what Bruno Groening calls making attempts. Not that they didn't keep striving for God, but they realized that their problem was bigger than them, that only God could solve it. And here's a quote of Bruno Groening. But here, dear friends, it is always like this. In all the cases, if I say hundreds, then it is thousands of them, where people had been definitely given up on by their nearest and dearest, who had said it themselves, I or we have attempted everything possible to free them from this evil, but we can't do it. That is, the one and the other are just speaking the truth here, and that they, just as many others, are letting them know. We can't help here. Look, dear friends, it's only here that truth now begins. If the person has tried everything possible, not only you, seen as individuals, know, but also the people around you, or where you believe that they still could help you. But after this, you certainly hit upon it, even if it was very late in the day. But let's stay with this. I say it once more again. When you have once again experienced the truth, and that your neighbors have said, well, I can't do anything here. I've tried everything, and that is simply, well, yes, just as human beings know how to say it, incurable. There is no way of treating it. We still can't do anything about it. Yes, I believe that to a certain extent, you too have got to this point. Now, dear friends, here begins the truth. Isn't that funny? That in recognizing that the problem is bigger than us, here begins the truth. Sorry, that was me adding that in there. Bruno didn't say, isn't it funny? That was me. But it just strikes me that once we get to this place of humility, that's where it can all begin. I'll continue reading. Now, dear friends, here begins the truth. Here they came to self-reflection. That is, the human beings who have experienced health and salvation in their own bodies. Here they knew for certain, I have been given up on by my neighbors, by my relatives, and by all those who have concerned themselves with me, have cared for me, and who have attempted everything possible, and yet who say it themselves, we can't do anything. As a mother said, I've tried everything possible for my child. As a husband said, I have tried everything to be able to go on helping my wife. But it was only ever an attempt. And so it is with a brother and a sister with her brother, and vice versa. And so it goes on. Yes, dear friends, the one has not been able to help the other here, for they had no advice to give, and so they could not go on and put it into practice. They had nothing they could say or do. Look, friends, it's precisely when a human being has acquired this understanding and that they know now what it's all about. That is, if they have got to the point of self-reflection, that they will then know, and they will find their way back to the one to whom they belong. Easy to say, but hard to do, seen from your point of view, that they belong to God. And so they are now truly mindful of God, who created them, and who has given them all of this, who has ordained so much for them, but which they must actually take into themselves. If they do this, it is good, but if they try, if they attempt, then every attempt will become something evil for them, for afterwards they will say every attempt has failed. But if they must make an attempt, perform a test, then is it not a tempting of God? Are you clear about this? I say yes. But soon you too will also say yes, and that what you've been doing up till now has been a tempting of God. No, friends, it can't go on like this. So the people I met in these rooms, they were humbled. They were humbled, in a sense, they were humbled by evil. They were humbled by an addiction, a particular flavor of evil that we call addiction, which Bruno would just call it evil. He wouldn't even want to know that it's addiction. He would say, I don't treat the illness. We free ourselves from evil and the illness goes. The illness is just a symptom. But regardless, in these rooms, in these different 12-step meeting rooms, I met people who had been completely humbled, who had been brought to their knees. And think about it. How humbling is it? It's one thing to be humbled when, like let's say your wife leaves you and you get fired and then you get cancer and then your business partner steals all your, when all these negative, that could be humbling. But how much more humbling is it when you are destroying yourself by doing something you don't even want to do anymore and you can't stop? That brings people to their knees. And sometimes, and very serious illness can bring people to their knees. Just as Bruno said in what I read, when everything has been tried and there seems like there's no solution, it's a very, well, as Bruno Groening said, here begins the truth. And now we can begin to understand maybe what Bruno means when he said only God can help us. And when he says we belong to God. In this very, what we call modern civilization, with technology, with grocery stores, we seem very powerful. And yet, what if we're designed to be living with nature, connected to God? And then we don't do that anymore, and we have all these things like addictions and illness and what we call mental illness. And what if we're just living contrary to our design? What if we're just designed to live in communion with God, to rely on God? So let's spend a little time in silence and observe the body. And just see if what I said and what Bruno said and what I said makes sense to you. That now, actually, before we do, so if someone's hungry, yes, we can help them. We can give them bread or give them food. Or if someone needs a ride or needs help changing a tire. So obviously we can help each other. But I believe what Bruno Groening here is talking about when he says, when people say we can't help you, or Bruno says only God can help, is that release from evil, that release from the cause of all problems. So observing the body, taking in the good, as Bruno says here. Let me see if I can find it. That God has given them all of this, who has ordained so much good for them, but which they must actually take into themselves, taking in what God has ordained for us through observing our bodies. Just observing the body, taking in the good. Turning to the one to whom we belong, to God, the divine. Continuing to observe the body. So here's a quote from Bruno. God created the human being beautiful, good, and healthy, which is how he wanted him to be. Originally, there was an indestructible bond between God and the human beings, and there was only love, harmony, and health. All was one. But when the first person listened to the voice, listened to the evil, which spoke from beyond this unity, and did what it said, the connection was severed. And a great chasm developed between God and the human being. There is no connection. On his own, a human, no matter how devout, no matter how much he prays, will constantly be attacked on his life's path by evil and dragged down into the depths. On your life path, you have arrived there, in the depths. You experience misfortune, pain, and incurable suffering. I say to you, do not go any deeper. Rather, I summon you to the great turnaround. Come back up, and I will build you a bridge across the chasm. Cross over from the path of suffering to the divine path. On this path, there is no misfortune, no pain, and nothing is incurable. This path leads back to God. So until I had this experience of being humbled myself by addictions, I just couldn't understand what on earth Bruno Groening meant that the evil would constantly attack us, and that a human being, no matter how devout, no matter how much he prays, will constantly be attacked on his life path. Basically, that I couldn't do it on my own, that I really needed God. You know, it was watching these people who, once they got humbled, these other addicts of different varieties with different addictive behaviors, once they got humble enough to admit, hey, I can't do this on my own, their lives turned around. And as long as they lived by certain spiritual principles, they stayed turned around. And as I said, some of the happiest people I've ever met were people who almost destroyed themselves and then found God and then really surrendered to God. You know, Bruno Groening said, I am nothing, God is everything. It's written that Christ said, of myself, I can do nothing. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ said, the meek, which is another word, a kind of humility, the meek shall inherit the earth. So humility is, you know, we like to think that we're adults and that we're powerful and that we can do things on our own. And in fact, Bruno was quite critical of that attitude, saying, well, I don't know about all of you guys. Well, he didn't say it like that, but basically, you know, that he said, I am and remain a child of God. And that from that place of humility, look how much good was able to flow through Bruno Groening, through relying on God, admitting he needed God. And in Bruno's own words, the confession, I am nothing, God is everything. So it's one of the paradoxes of the spiritual path. The more humble we become, the more powerful we become. Not necessarily powerful in a worldly sense of the word, though that can be part of it. We become empowered by God. So here's a quote from the book called Alcoholics Anonymous, which all the other programs are based on this book, all the other 12-step programs. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and to the people around us. That becomes the entire essence of the 12-step way of life, is surrendering to God and seeking to know and to do God's will. And isn't that exactly what Christ taught? And isn't what Bruno taught us? To attune ourselves, to tune into the divine. And as Bruno said, if you want to succeed, follow God. So here's another quote from the Alcoholics Anonymous book. We are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as He thinks, just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us do, and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. And one more quote. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God, meaning quit trying to control other people. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in the drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the Father. We are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and that concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Once we take up this attitude, the Alcoholics Anonymous book says, we had a new employer, meaning God. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves and our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, we enjoyed peace of mind, and we discovered we could face life successfully. We became conscious of his, meaning God's, presence. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. It's written that Christ said, I didn't come here to be served, but to serve. And Bruno Groening showed us what that looks like to really be a servant of God. Christ showed us, and what we have is written records of Christ. However, Bruno Groening showed us not very long ago. We have videos and tape recordings and photographs and personal stories of people who met someone who really was a servant of God, who really surrendered to God, who really lived the teachings of Christ. And what I saw in these rooms was I saw people living the teachings of Christ, surrendering to God, relying on God, having faith in God, and dedicating their lives to spiritual growth and to service, to drawing closer to God and to helping others. No wonder they're some of the happiest people I've ever met. If you dedicate your life to growing closer to God, to becoming more of a servant of God, or as I sometimes like to say, to becoming more Christ-like, and to helping people, well, Bruno Groening said that if we follow the teachings of Christ, we'll have a successful life. It may or may not be successful in the worldly sense of the word, but connection to God, serving others, continuous spiritual growth. It sounds really good to me. So let's spend a little time in silence. What would it mean to each of us to rely on God, to let God be in charge, to trust infinite God rather than finite self? Observing the body, taking in the good. Continuing to observe the body, letting go of thoughts, noticing how we feel. Taking in the good. So we rely on food and water and air for our biological life, for our physical body. We're designed that way. What if we're also designed to rely on God? What if our soul, much less our body, what if it's just designed that way? And everything around us, all of this culture, all of this technology is just based on one lie. We don't need God. Maybe two lies. We don't need God. We don't need nature. What if that sums up all the chaos in the world? The people I met in these 12-step rooms, their entire lives were based really around one idea. I need God. When your life is in the toilet and you're the one who put it there and you're the one who's flushing it down deeper and you can't stop, and then you hear someone else say, hey, I was just like you, and there's this thing called God, and if that's too complicated, you can just call it a higher power that saved my life. And all you have to do is a few simple things and stay connected to that and obedient to that. Some people, when they hear that message, they don't believe it and they flush their lives away. And some people, I mean, alcoholism, drug addiction, much less all the other addictions. How many lives do they take every day? Who knows? But some people hear that message and then they understand what that song Amazing Grace is about. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, beyond lost, really almost insane, out of control, delusional, in the most painful sense of the word. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. And the whole basis of that new life of these people, they sum up sometimes the whole program like this: trust God, clean house, meaning make apologies to people you've hurt, let go of your defects of character, except we can't let them go, so ask God to take them away, and help others. Trust God, clean house, help others. But it's all based on this one idea: we need God, which I believe is really the core of everything Bruno Groening taught. As he himself said, to be connected to God, that is everything. So thank you so much to everyone who's listening to this recording. And thank you to everyone who joined in. So I've heard... So God's infinite, our problems are finite. God is like the ocean, our problem. I don't even want to call them our problems, the problems that we're facing. Whether it's addiction or disease or depression or relationship, whatever the problem is that each of us is facing, it's like one drop of water in the ocean. Compared to God, the problem is nothing. I have heard, I can't say everything, but almost everything healed. Addiction, allergies, asthma, depression, anxiety, broken bones have healed faster, cavities have healed, post-traumatic stress disorder, dependency on psychiatric medications gone, dependence on sleeping pills, everything. Much less addictions of every kind healed. Bruno Groening said nothing is incurable, nothing is impossible. God is the supreme physician for all of humanity, and offered a really simple, straightforward way how to depend upon and trust upon God. So thank you so much for listening in. And whatever it is you're facing, there's something that's a million times larger than that. I call that God. You can call it a higher power. Or you can just call it that which made us. Or to keep it really simple, Bruno Groening sometimes called it the good. For me, my theology's gotten really simple. God is that which made me and that which helps and heals and is good. Thank you so much for listening in. If you have any questions, feel free to email or leave a comment on this video. Thank you.